we're going to start out with a conversation where I'll be in conversation with Amy Sall, and then we're going to go to two presentations, one for each archivist, one from the South African National Film and Video Sound Archives, and another presentation from the Cinematheque Africaine de Ouagadougou. So, and then we'll have a wrap up and then the Q&A session afterwards. So now I just wanted to introduce our speakers. Amy Sall is a writer, independent researcher, and collector archivist based in New York. She is the author of the book, The African Gaze, Photography, Cinema, and Power, published by Thames and Hudson in 2024. Amy is also the founding editor of SUNU, Journal of African Affairs, Critical Thought, and Aesthetics, a Pan-African post-disciplinary platform exploring the artistic, cultural, and intellectual production of Africa and the diaspora across time and space. As former adjunct faculty at the New School, she conceived and taught two courses, The African Gaze, Visual Culture of Postcolonial Africa, and the Social Imagination and Third Cinema and the Counter Narratives. Amy's work and interests explore the theory and praxis of cultural sovereignty, cultural preservation, anti-post-coloniality, human rights, visual culture, and the archive. So I am going to, and I see you're getting lots of love in the chat for your book. I also, I think I'm going to also introduce the other archivists that we're going to have today. We're also going to hear from Masego Mutle, who heads the Film and Video Preservation Unit at the South African National Film and Video and Sound Archives under the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. Ms. Mutle has 12 years experience in archives management, and she studied archival studies at the University of South Africa, and she's currently doing her Master of Information Science for the study of access to audiovisual resources. And then we also are going to have Léonce Thira. Léonce has served as the director of the African Cinematheque of Ouagadougou at the Pan-African Film and Television Festival of Ouagadougou, FESPACO, and is president of the Cinematographic and Audiovisual Heritage Commission during the FESPACO editions, which includes heritage workshops, FESPACO Classics, and Cine Expo. Mr. Thira obtained his Master 2 in Local Development and Management of Local Authorities at Thomas Sankara University in Burkina Faso in 2021, and holds a Master 2 in Development in Cultural Heritage Management from Senghor University in Alexandria, International French Language University in Egypt in 2015. He also graduated from the National School of Administration and Magistracy in Burkina Faso with the rank of Museum Curator Restaurer. And he is currently a PhD student at Norbert Zongo University in Kudogu in the Department of History and Archaeology of the UFR, specifically in the History of Art and Cultural Heritage Laboratory in Burkina Faso. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with Amy and I in conversation, and then I'm going to hand it over to Masego for their presentation. So welcome, Amy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to IFLA AVMS for organizing this incredible webinar and for inviting me to participate. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I just, I wanted to first congratulate you on your book. It's a beautiful book, and if folks haven't seen it, it's a wonderful resource for cinema studies, for photography, African studies, and I really highly recommend it. And the journal is also pretty great as well. There's one issue that's available online, and the link is available in the slide deck that we'll share with you. So I definitely think you should check that out. But I wanted to talk to you to just kind of get a sense from you about, I understand that the book was sort of like came from the class that you taught, or was an extension of the class. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your journey. You have a lot of archival images in the book, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about your journey, sort of working with archives and sort of engaging with archival materials for your work.
Firstly, thank you so much for the very kind words and the support of this book and my work, Michelle. I appreciate it. Hopefully, I can be succinct and brief because, as we were joking earlier, the journey is very all over the place. But with regard to the book, it was a sort of a new iteration of the course that I taught at the New School University in New York City. The title is a mouthful. We all heard it in the introduction. But the semester, my course was divided into photography and film, with the beginning part of the course focusing on sort of the context, like developing the context and explaining why African photography and African film are important because of its response. It's a direct refusal and response to colonial images and sort of the colonial contextualizing of African people and subject matter. And the course was quite successful, and I made the decision to release the syllabus and make it public so that everyone can engage with the course. And this is out of my belief that the archive should be accessible. In my course, I was able to show my students a lot of films that are not really accessible to the masses because they're just simply not on certain platforms. I was able to share with my students certain archival images, and I wanted this material to be sort of liberated outside of the ivory tower, so to speak, so that so many people can engage because lack of access to archival material is still a persistent issue. So I released the syllabus, and wherever possible, I hyperlinked what I could find that I could legally make available to the public. And the course and the syllabus spread like wildfire. That was a wonderful surprise. And so out of that, I thought, okay, this is interesting feedback. How can we increase the accessibility, and how can we widen the conversation around African photographers, filmmakers, and just at large film and photography from Africa? And I thought the next logical step would be to write a book. Granted, having no experience with publishing, no connections in publishing, I just thought this was the a natural evolution, a natural progression. And luckily, after reaching out to a few publishers, Thames and Hudson, who is my current publisher, thought this was a great idea, saw the value in this, saw the necessity in this, and together we worked to create this book. And some of the guidelines was to ensure that no matter where you are in the spectrum in terms of whether you are an expert in African film and photography and archiving, or someone who is just new to the area, that everyone can find their place as a reader when they pick up this book. The other condition was to be as intentional as possible, and by that I mean as opposed to just relying on the standard practice of going directly to the museums or directly to the institutional archives first. I wanted to go to the family members or the artists themselves if they were still with us, so that we had their permission, their blessing, and included their personal archive into this process. So we were very successful with quite a number of the image makers featured in the book to be able to do that. But there were instances where we were unsuccessful, so we had to go to the galleries, to the photo licensing agencies, to the institutions for those cases. But I'm happy to say that we were able to get in contact with a lot of the filmmakers and photographers or their families, have conversations with them, get their permission to include the images in this book. And I think, yeah, just taking that intentional step has made the process of writing this book that much more rewarding. And it also includes the people themselves in this book. And yeah, I just wanted to avoid any sort of harmful practices of exclusion and not letting people know that their work would be included and not just getting their blessing. And so, yeah, that was the gist of creating this book.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I'm just wondering, like, when you were, seeking materials, and also even just, I'm wondering how difficult it might have been to get in touch, to reach like the filmmakers, and then also to get access to the films themselves,
Mhm.
because the one thing I love about the book is that it's more of, it's not something where you're going to read all the way through. It's like you're kind of, you can go back in and out, and kind of read about someone, and then go and do a little bit more research, and look at their work, and explore. But I'm wondering, like, for you, how did you do that? Because I would imagine some of these films would be kind of hard to get to.
Yes, definitely. And this is why, I'm very much passionate about increasing accessibility of these films in a way that um, supports the filmmaker so that they are able to benefit from this access, but also as audience members and lovers of film that we can easily watch. But in my case, because I had ties to universities, I was able to take advantage of the university libraries. And of course, I have to underscore not everyone is able to have that same privilege. So I took advantage of the access that I had within my university, the new school, and also the platform Canopy, which allows you to, if you're part of an accredited institution or if you have a library card in certain states in America, you can access certain hard to find or inaccessible films. So that helps a great deal. Um, there are some of these films that are available sort of informally on YouTube and floating around, which um, I'm in two minds about that because on one hand, as appreciators of films, we have that easy access, but on the other hand, the filmmakers do not benefit from their films being available for free on YouTube. So there's that level of the conversation. So yeah, I had different avenues through which I could access these films, luckily. In terms of accessing the filmmakers themselves or their family members, I had to rely on my network and my community. I had to, send emails and messages to people who I knew had connections or were in contact with a lot of these image makers. And a lot of it, because I wasn't able to travel during the making of this book for research, a lot of the contact was through WhatsApp and email. Um, so yeah, it was basically relying on my network, relying on my peers and some friends to connect me to some of the filmmakers or their family members. And from there, I've maintained a WhatsApp relationship for the most part. And so, and that relationship, those relationships have um, maintained and flourished. And now every holiday, I reach out or we have informal chats, and it's been a gift. But yeah, it was not easy. And in fact, trying to get in contact with these filmmakers or their families took so long that I had to, or my publisher and I had to delay the initial release date for the book. But I didn't mind that because I wanted to make sure that we exhausted all options so that we could ensure that most of the bulk of the material, the visual material, is coming from the image makers themselves. And if they didn't come from the image makers themselves, I at least wanted them to know that we were including their works, just to have their again, like I said, blessing and their permission. But it definitely took a while, but it was worth it. And the main word for this book was intention, intention, intention. And um, if I tried to take as much time as it needed to take in order to make this book that I can honestly say that I'm proud of.
Yeah, well, that definitely comes through. I mean, when you see the book, you definitely can see all of the intention. We can also see um, the value of having someone who is connected to the culture in
Mhm.
a real way. It really changes how things are presented, and so I really appreciate that.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I was kind of also just wondering, just out of curiosity, did the filmmakers mention anything about um, access problems that they had with accessing their work?
Mhm.
or like or issues that they might have had with um, preserving their work, or making sure that it's going to remain available.
Yeah, I didn't have in-depth conversations about that too much, but some of the recurring ideas that were coming up in conversations that their films were they themselves did not have access to their films because they either a producer had the rights or they were in a particular cinematheque. So they didn't have their films with them themselves, which I thought was interesting. So, for example, there was a filmmaker that I reached out to get permission to use film stills in the book, and they said, "Well, my film is locked up with such and such cinematheque." So it's issues like that where, um, I think ideally I would love for all the filmmakers to have easy access and ownership to their own films, but the politics of filmmaking and distribution and production, it's not so cut and dry. And this is actually an area that I'm trying to have more conversations about and do more research about to ensure that from top to bottom there is a level of ownership, there is a level of accessibility. Like I think it's kind of crazy sometimes that a filmmaker cannot have access to their own film. There's also a filmmaker who passed away recently, Suleiman Sisse, and I was very close to him. And in previous conversations, we talked about his very early journeys in filmmaking, and he studied in Russia like many African filmmakers. And there are some of his films that he told me that some of his films are still in Russia. So there's that level of the conversation that I think needs to be had to discuss and decipher how do we ensure African filmmakers have access and ownership to their films, or how do they financially benefit from their films being repeatedly watched by newer and growing audiences? And so obviously these are questions that can't be answered in this webinar or because there's so much work to be done um and yeah, I'm thinking about these questions all the time, and I'm also thinking about how do we ensure that African film heritage preservation is what I like to call in-house, meaning it's African owned, it's African led, which is why I'm very excited to hear from Masego and Leonce and learn about their practices because I think there is a growing disconnect. There is a growing sort of fissure between African films and how they're preserved. I know that there are a lot of African film materials here in the West in certain universities. And so people who are on the continent obviously cannot access them for very obvious reasons. So I'm interested in thinking about all these things and how do we bridge the gap? How do we close the gap to ensure accessibility, ownership, that intellectual property is protected, and yeah, that there isn't a sort of neo-colonial cycle happening with regard to African film material.
Yeah, and I mean, and then that makes me also think about, you know, if that's the case, then how are people on the continent accessing this work as well? So the audiences, our African audiences, how are they able to get to this material? I don't
Yeah, I
know.
think
Yeah.
this is something I also think about. I mean, I think hopefully there'll be more initiatives to develop more community-driven, community-based film screenings. I think one of the things that I struggle with is, for example, if a new African film is being released, or if an African film is being restored and that restoration is being released, I find or I believe that African audiences are often the last audiences to watch those films. They go to Paris, Italy, New York, or wherever before they even reach sort of the country of origin, or where, before they reach the communities that these films are actually reflecting. And yeah, I'm hoping that there can be, I know there are efforts happening to sort of mitigate that, but I'm hoping there'll be more of that so that, instead of premiering in Cannes, it can premiere in Dakar or can premiere in Ouagadougou first before it makes its travels. But yeah, I'm always thinking about these things as I said. So, and I mentioned to Michelle earlier in our previous conversations that I have more questions than solutions and answers at this point because I'm thinking about the issues at hand and how we can collectively work together to create solutions.
Sure. Well, this is how we get started with solutions, right? Is having the conversation and asking the questions. So yeah, so I think that's I think we're on the right track for sure. And I think your book is a really good place for folks to start because it helps to sort of um, expand our knowledge of filmmakers, because there were a lot of filmmakers that you featured that don't get usually get a lot of attention, right? And that aren't the the mainstays that we always kind of go to. And so it helps us to really appreciate the expansive, nature of what is available in African film heritage. So thank you for that. Uh,
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that this book is a way to honor these image makers who have created such important work. And also hopefully this can serve as a contribution to this collective archiving of African film heritage. And as you said, I love that you said that this is a book that you return to. You don't read it in one go. And that's exactly one of the intentions. I hope that people can continue to revisit this book to deepen their study and their knowledge, because, if you have the book, you know that there are written texts that accompany the images, but they're not super, super long or in depth. And so I really invite all the readers to dig deeper, and hopefully this book will be the first stop in a sort of, or one of the first stops of a rabbit hole to continue to further deepen your knowledge of African film and photographic history. And yeah, this is one of my contributions to archiving African film, and I'm eager to deepen my practice and knowledge as a autodidactic archivist myself that's trying to learn from other archivists and resources to help me continue this work in different iterations.